For those who just joined, Darko is hosting from Serbia, so thank God for technology. And thank you for joining us on this sort of special open meeting, the last one until the fall. So as we always do, I think we should still do roundtable introductions for everybody but the interviewees and the interviewers. They'll get a chance later. We always do that just to make sure that if there's connections that need to be made, that we can make them. So I'll go down the list and as I see them, John, I'd like to give the spiel.
Good morning, all. Yeah, I've been a member, I guess, of Switch for quite some time. I'm on the board of directors of Emmanuel Residences, senior housing, social housing operation in Belleville.
Thank you. I see Kathy Ireland next. You want to unmute?
Good morning, everyone. I'm with Spark Center and I'm involved in an initiative that takes, we're working just to create a stronger collaboration down the corridor to raise the profile of the wonderful place that we live and work in the Eastern Ontario corridor. Yeah.
Thank you. Tony, you're on mute.
Yes, hello there. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony De La Concha with Greenpoint Engineering. I'm happy to announce that I just submitted my payment yesterday as a small firm to be a member of Switch Ontario. So you'll get it on your database at some point in the next few hours, I guess. I got my receipt though. So
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, Helen, you're on mute. Yeah.
There we go. Good morning. I am Helene Commel. I am a relatively long time member of Switch. Maybe, I don't know, something will happen, maybe 10 years or so, I don't know, thereabouts. And I certainly heartily recommend membership to all. I am a retired builder of single family homes to the Passive House standard. And I think I was calmer and less busy and more organized before I retired.
Uh-huh. All right. Thank you, Heather. Darko.
Hello, everybody. I'm Darko Matovic, the vice chair of the board and one of few co-conspirators of this heritage project. I'm pretty happy about that. And currently in Serbia, taking advantages of remote capabilities. And that's it for now.
Perfect. Thank you, Darko. Steve Visco.
Retired Queen's academic, member of Switch for maybe 3-4 years now. And I first became aware of the problem with global warming in 1976 when I read an article in New Scientist about cow burps.
Okay. Rosie.
Yeah, I'm member of Switch board for about 3 years now. Member of Switch for about 10 years. I'm the manager for research and innovation services at Stantec, a large consulting firm. That's my day job. And I'm a member of the small committee working on the Heritage Project. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Lisa Asbrook. You're on mute.
Thanks, David. Lisa Asbrook. I'm an energy and business law partner at Cunningham Swan. I've been working in the field of renewable energy for almost 17 years now. I moved back to Kingston in 2010. I've supported Switch since. I've been on the board, and our law firm has supported Switch since at events and speaking engagements and whatnot over the years, and we continue to do so. So I'm calling in from Vacation Day, and I really wouldn't miss this. I love seeing all these faces. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you. Robert Jeffries. You're on mute, Rob.
Sorry, I have an unstable internet connection, so I'm cutting in and out a bit.
Yeah, if
I'm
you want to
Bob
turn off your
Jeffries, I'm a
video,
retired
that might help.
architect And doing Switch, a month.
Okay.
Any better?
If that, do you want to try again? We really missed everything you said.
Sure. I'm Bob Jeffries. I'm a new member of Switch. I joined about a month or two ago. I'm a retired architect with a large interest in better quality of delivery of houses.
Thank you, Bob. Where are we? Paul McClatchy.
Hey everyone, good morning. I'm not going to turn my video on because my bandwidth is crap. Yeah, I'm a Switch board member and also the City of Kingston's Environment Director. So a lot of involvement in environmental, climate change, and energy matters.
Thank you, Paul. Carol McKay. Please unmute. There we go.
I'm an interested observer who's been fascinated by Switch ever since I heard somebody speak on fuel cells and hydrogen, and I did my own research, started asking around, and I think it was Bridget Doherty who told me about Switch. And at that time, I thought it was probably a whole bunch of people just like me. And now, and this is why I'm on this meeting, I find out that I probably would never have spoken of it had I realized the quality of expertise in the group. But I still find it fascinating. And what impresses me even more is that I think you actually listened to me about hydrogen. And since I presented all my papers to Switch, we now have a Canadian hydrogen policy and we have an Ontario hydrogen policy. And it seems to me that maybe I wasn't too far wrong. But what I appreciated about Switch is that they listened. And I'm going to listen to you now because I really have no idea of the amazing qualifications of both of you. And I'm on just audio because it's 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Carol. Our goal is to raise everybody's boat. So I'd say you came to the right place. Ed Thomas.
Hi, everyone. Ed Thomas. I've remember the first Switch meeting 20 odd years ago, and I have been in and out of the renewable space as an investor, as an entrepreneur, and an advisor. Day job is I do a little bit of tech mobilization work, currently centered around particle physics at the McDonald Institute at Queen's.
Thank you, Ed. Mama Day. Unmute.
Hi, I'm a PhD student at Queen's in environmental studies, and I joined Switch I think less than a month ago. So I'm working on sewage lagoons, which are supposed to be one of energy efficient wastewater treatment systems. And so I got interested in Switch just to know what's out there in terms of energy efficient stuff and to learn, mostly to learn.
Perfect. And Mama is our current student board member. So thank you for joining the board. Where are we next? Mark Sibley.
Good morning. Calling from the edge of Frontenac Provincial Park, so I may chop up. I'm the webmaster for 350 Kingston, and we have an initiative right now to try to get the City of Kingston to commit to a goal of a 50% carbon reduction by 2030. Good morning.
Thank you very much. And let me try to get back to the screen here. Soren Christensen. Soren, are you there? Maybe we'll try and come back. Maria Skodaki. Soren
Hello.
has no mic,
Good.
so welcome anyway.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I have recently joined the board of the committee for the switch here in Kingston, and I've been delighted to being able to, I guess, tap into the energy and the vision of Switch as an organization with respect to sustainability, working on military installations for 2 decades and seeing how important it is to adopt sustainable practices. It's a really pleasure to be able perhaps to contribute at least to join these activities. So with respect to the day job, I'm a director of the RMC Green Team in Water and Environment, and adjunct assistant professor both at RMC and Queen's, and environmental background. Thank you, and looking forward to the discussions today.
Awesome. Thank you. So my name is David Hindman. I'm the current president and board chair. I'm one of the ringleaders on the Heritage Project. So next thing I want to do is give a big shout out to Rosie, Darko, Boyana, and Jung Ah for all their help.
I would just invite Shannon to present herself. She just joined in.
Oh, she just joined? Okay. I missed. Where is she? I'm not seeing her on my screen.
Must be on the other page.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Hello, Shannon.
Hello.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi. Hi, I'm Shannon Claggett. I'm the Dean of Applied Science, Skills and Technology at Loyalist College. Longtime member of Switch, was on the board of directors for about 15, 20 years. Not quite 20, I wasn't at the very beginning, so probably 15 years. And just looking forward to hearing what today's all about.
Thank you, Shannon. So anyway, I was given a shout out to the co-conspirators on the Heritage Project. So thank you all. It's been a whole lot of fun so far. It's been a good learning, and that learning will kick into high gear with today's event. I'm just going to say that I don't see Tom Carpenter on the call. He was our 4th interviewee. So when we get rolling, I will start pinging him with emails, seeing if I can get a phone number or something to try and track him down to get him to join. He confirmed he was available earlier in the week, so I'm not sure where that's gone, but we'll get things rolling. So the only other thing I need to do before we get into the nitty gritty is we always do a thank you to new members. Individual members in the last month since the last meeting have been Gordon Skinner, Mamaya Ade, thank you for joining the board. Excuse me, Maria has joined the board and provided her membership. And Vicky Schmolka has renewed her membership. And Tony, I'll take your word. I didn't see you on the list last night when I looked, but glad to have you aboard. So thank you very much. So today's talk, Switch at 20. Where have we been and where are we going? The introduction to this is that Rosie came to the board with a thought that the Kingston Heritage Fund might be a good place to go to get some funds for looking at what Switch has done. And given that 2020 is our 20th anniversary, or 2022, sorry, it seemed like a good thing. So lots of work last fall on applications to the Heritage Fund, getting the contract in place once we were told we were approved, working to find Boyana and Jung Ah. It was first Jung Ah, and Jung Ah brought Boyana on board, and thank you for that. We have seen how they interview. They did an interview of Rosie, myself, and Darko about a month ago as we were doing a planning session. So we know we're all in good hands. And this is really about celebrating Switch over the last 20 years, finding out new information about, what people have contributed, what people have gotten out of Switch, whether they're longstanding members or fairly short term. And we've tried to pull, for the interviews going forward, we've pulled an incomplete list, and it's a work in progress, a list of people that have, been movers and shakers within the organization, and we hope we'll have lots of interesting insight into what we've done. So the broader goal is to try and capture what Switch has been over the last 20 years, so that going forward, there's a benchmark of stories and activity, events, and an archive of where we've been. So there is the nutshell. Today we have Catherine Wood, President and CEO of Pivotal Momentum, Tom Carpenter, I hope, who will, I'll work to try and track him down. Brad Leonard, a former board member and currently a co-owner at Friendly Fires. I see the sign behind him. And we, for many, many years, had the Friendly Fires logo on the thank you for the snacks at in-person meetings. We haven't had to do snacks for a couple of years now. And also Harriet Waterman, who introduced herself as a long-standing board member. So I guess we jumped the gun on letting Harriet in early. So with that, we have provided some high-level questions to the interviewees, and we're going to let Jung-Ah and Boyana sort of lead the charge from here. If there's time at the end, we'll do sector news. If there's time at the end, we can take questions that get put into the chat. But really, I'm assuming that the rest of the time until 9:30 is a very robust Q&A around the interview and interviewee table. So with that, I will stop talking. And thank you all for being here.
Okay, hello everyone. It's really great to meet you all in this Zoom meeting this morning. I'm just going to briefly explain like how we sort of structured this panel discussion this morning. So we'd like to ask you some questions to get to know about Switch and how you were involved in it. And today's discussion will be divided into 3 sections. Firstly, with your membership with Switch and how you were involved with it. And secondly, it will be more about the history of the organization. And then lastly, the 3rd section will be about how you see the organization moving forward. And if we have any time after the panel discussion, we would like to open it up to the whole group, to everyone, for any questions that you'd like to ask to the panels or ask each other. Yeah, we know who you are, the panels, but please just introduce yourself, like very briefly, who you are and how long you've been part of Switch, and why did you decide to do that?
Would you like me to start?
Sure.
That'd be okay. So hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Wood. I know a good number of you, but it's really nice to have some sort of new introductions today. And I would say that's one of the things that's always impressed me about Switch is your ability to continue to provide a venue or a forum for like-minded people to come together. And I'm very used to the steady stream of new members joining, and I congratulate you for that, because there's relatively few organizations that are able to sustain that. So I think it's a sign of the strength of your networking that you're able to do that. I suspect that I was one of the originals way back. I don't even know how long before the official start, but my earliest memory, which would give you a bit of an idea of what role I was playing, is sitting around a table at one of the downtown restaurants. I think it was on Brock Street in Kingston, where we were trying to decide on the name of this new organization. And there were a number of names tossed out. I think I was on the marketing committee at that time. And I believe it was Brian Ritchie that brought forward, I don't know whether it was his idea or if it came from someone else, but brought forward the name of Switch. And for me, it was love at first sight, because I just thought that one word really encapsulated so well what we were all trying to accomplish. So don't change it, because it's had 20 years of good life. And I think there's probably another 20 in that name, and we could talk about more about that later on. But so I was never actually a board member, which is kind of interesting. I'm not really sure why, but I was on the marketing committee, and I spent much more of my time out interacting with sort of external organizations, external to Switch. And on more than one occasion, coming back to the switchboard to consult on some of the work that those other organizations were doing and provide a channel for some input on that front. Got my own feet wet in terms of adopting some sustainable energy technologies many years ago, but that's another whole story. But I think I'll just pause there and allow others to jump in.
Who would you like next?
Harry or Brad, would you like to introduce?
Brad, go for it.
My name is Brad Leonard. I'm a co-owner of Friendly Fires. In 2012, my previous company's name was Renewable Energy Plum Hollow. We merged in 2012. We have 5 locations across Ontario. And I became aware of Switch, I think through Ted, right? I think Ted Shu back in probably round 2, when we just before the microfit program sort of kicked in. So we're talking, microfit came in what, 2008, so it must have been the early 2000s. And I sat on the board, I believe, with Lisa and Harriet and a lot of wonderful people. Don Young, Tom Carpenter, John was on the board with us then too as well. And it was in our time, we went from this sort of small group of folks to it just exploded. Do you guys remember that? It just went crazy. It was like, I don't know, a room full of like 15 of us or 20 of us. And then all of a sudden there's like, we had to get the curling club at one point because we just had so many people and we couldn't fit them all in at once. It was like, and that was the early days of microfit and all the exposure. And that was, there is some history here. I don't know if a lot of people know, when we had the World Wind Energy Conference, I think it was called, at St. Lawrence. And we were blessed enough here at the store to have David Suzuki come by, and Switch was a part of that. And from that conference, which focused on community sustainability, community involvement with renewables. And we are lucky Dave Suzuki was here to sort of turn the power on for our wind turbine here at the store and our feed-in solar panels. This is before any of that program was out. And from those meetings, my understanding is that the German Minister of Energy was at the conference. David Suzuki took him by hand, drove to Toronto, and introduced him to Dalton McGuinty, our premier at the time, and said, "This man's doing something with renewables in his country, and you need to do something here in Ontario." And from that meeting, from something that was started here in Kingston, we had the feed-in tariff program, which you know, as we see in the landscape now, a lot of solar panels around the province, which is great because growing up, a lot of us didn't know what solar panels were. And now when you talk to younger generations, they see them, it's normal, it's a common thing. So, and Switch had a big involvement in all that, you know, with that whole start. So it was a pretty exciting time when that was all going on. It was very hectic, very busy, lots of people. And it's great to see that, you know, here we are many years later and still a great group of people, still doing a lot of good things. So yeah, so let me turn it over to Harriet, one of my co-board members at the time.
A really important part of history there, Brad, that you've raised. And one of the things that, you know, we have always had a lot of small businesses. And I believe at the time, because we were looking for metrics, we created with that new government policy about 100 jobs in our region. And I know certainly you, Brad, benefited from it. So I've been involved since inception. Don Young, Rob Miller, and I took over, I guess if we started in 2002 and 2005, took over from the original 3 board members that constituted Switch. I've been a treasurer, and also through my role with NRC IRAP in the federal government. You know, we've had some challenges over the years with funding. And so a number of us got together and we presented, certainly in the early days, as Brad was saying, as far as FIT goes, some conferences, the Green Profit Conference, and that sustained us for quite a while. It brought visibility to Switch, and I helped fund that. So that's, you know, and then Steve Sotil, I mean, my involvement in the organization, I think both Brad and Kathy and certainly Helene said, it's the quality of the people, and it just has never changed from the top of the the top of the world as far as qualifications, knowledge, education, and impact in our community and actually around the world. So it's and I had nothing to do with that. I'm just a part of the organization. That's it for me.
Thank you. Catherine, did you want to speak to that a little bit?
I did want to follow up on a point that Harriet was making in terms of success from a job creation point of view, because I was remiss in not describing at least one of the original points of genesis for Switch, which was as an economic development initiative in the community. And if I recall correctly, Peter Tobias was involved in some of those discussions, and we had an initial target of 3 companies, 50 employees each within 3 years, all in kind of the renewable, alternative energy, sustainable energy, whatever you want to call it, space. So that was part of the original expectation and aspiration for Switch. And I'm really glad that Harriet mentioned that point, because I'm not sure that we got to that point in the same way than we might have originally thought. But there's definitely been, obviously, the membership of this organization is a good indicator that there's definitely been some success on that front in terms of job creation and formation of new companies and so on.
Thank you. So that was great, because we got to hear a little bit about the genesis of Switch from 3 of you. So can you now explain like some of like specific projects and initiatives that you took on while you were you've been involved?
Can I start with that one?
Go ahead.
I don't want to throw in another point that you also may want to talk about, Catherine, and that is that we actually initiated the renewable energy programs at St. Lawrence College. And of course, Shannon can talk more about this, but God knows how many jobs were involved there. And it's grown from 1 program to 3 programs. And, you know, Shannon was assistant dean, and now she's dean at in Belleville. So I mean, you know, as far as growth and opportunity, but basically it was Don Young, Rob Miller, and myself. And I funded a Queen student through IRAP to set up the first renewable energy house that they had at the St. Lawrence College campus. So I think that was very important. And now I'll turn it over to Kathy.
I'll just follow up on that and just echo what Harriet was talking about. A lot of the times over the last couple of decades, which again is increasingly difficult to remember all the details, but sometimes the best things that happened as a result of Switch weren't actually undertaken by Switch, but by other organizations that might have been members of Switch or that were inspired to action because of the kind of focus that Switch was bringing to those issues. So, you know, I remember just one of the items on my own personal list was being involved in the early stages of the Sustainable Energy Applied Research Center at St. Lawrence, and Shannon was deeply involved in that. So, and then there were conferences and meetings at Queen's related to bioenergy, for instance. And so Warren Mabey, for instance, who's, I don't think he's on today's call, but he was certainly leading the charge on that, and Darko and others were involved in that. And so there were a number of those kinds of initiatives that if we were to go back and say, so what did Switch trigger in the community, in the broader community? I think it might be a very interesting and perhaps very long list. And I invite others to chime in. I just mentioned a couple that I'm aware of, but there's probably lots of people on this call that might have other suggestions for that. So that was primarily my role moving forward, was just being that connector between the organizations that are out in the community with aspirations that dovetailed with what Switch was trying to do and trying to help make those kinds of connections. So I'll pause there and see if there are other comments or suggestions.
Yeah, I think the big thing too with Switch is that, you know, I'm a business owner. I'm coming in, maybe a bit of a capitalist behind me. There's other people in the room that maybe don't look at it that way. But Switch was a spot where it was okay. It was okay. I was okay to go in and solicit business. It was encouraged. It was something that, you know, having that behind you, you know, it was a friendly place to come, if I could put it that way. And we could talk about stuff. Often competitors would be in the room and it was, you know, it was good. We always had a very cordial sort of relationship with everybody. Everybody knew everybody. We all got along. And it's a place where we could talk and be free to do that sort of stuff. So that's, I think, a pretty unusual space for someone like me, who's a business owner, to go in and then people were excited. They're like, okay, well, what's going on? What's getting done? What, you know, a lot of times at Switch, there'd be a lot of conversations about what's new and on the horizon and what's happening. And it was really neat because people come to us and say, okay, well, this is pretty exciting. And where's the real world application for this? How is it actually playing out in the community? Where's it being deployed? So that to me was always encouraging. I always thought that was great. You'd have people like Harriet who worked in government. You had public sector, private sector, volunteer groups. You had a whole bunch of people coming together. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I think it's really good.
Can I just add one thing? I don't see him on the call, but I think one of Switch's successes is one of our former executive directors was Ted Chu, as Brad mentioned. And, you know, he has been our MP and now he's an MPP. So that's certainly a success for Switch, because I know a lot of you were involved in helping Ted amongst on various campaigns.
You know, and the other thing too, like when you think of the people we met being on the board, Dalton McGuinty when he was prime minister, just so many politicians that came through at federal levels that wanted to know what was going on with Switch. Former leaders of the Liberal Party, you know, federal Liberal Party, all of that sort of happened around this group of people. So so there's some influence that happened, just when we talk about, when I think about the microfit program and the FIT program and all that was happening, and how Switch would allow us to talk to somebody like John Gerritsen, our MPP at the time, about how is this happening in the real world. Like it just really made everybody come together. I think that was a great thing. I think it is a great thing.
Yeah, the other thing is we have an amazing climate of support in Kingston through Utilities Kingston historically, through Paul McClatchy, who's now on our board. So we really do have a coordinated set of principles within Kingston. And as Brad says, we all talk.
So I wanted to follow up on the part where you were all talking about other organizations that Switch has been involved with. I actually wanted to ask, like, how being a member of Switch has influenced your business decisions and opportunities. So maybe Catherine, you could start.
Sure. So I think it's important for people to know that back in 1996, I think that's correct. It's difficult to remember now. Yeah, it was. I graduated from Queens with a very accelerated degree in environmental science, and as part of that, I was struck by the difference in the courses and the programs between my first degree, which I finished in '77, through to '96. When I did my first degree in economics, there was 1.5 credit course on energy policy. That was all there was at the university. And so then if you accelerate through to 1996, we had an entire 4-year program in environmental sciences. So, and at the same time, I was shifting gears in terms of my business. But at the same time, I was also making decisions that ended up being able to run my business on a combination of small wind and solar. Ended up having the opportunity to provide the physical facility for certification, I think, of 6 technicians for Steve Harrison's solar thermal technology, because I got that installed here. So there were a bunch of decisions that I made related to the business and personal life that were associated with that. I took technical training on both wind through CanLIA and Arise technology on solar electric, and obviously the technicians that were certified here. I was really happy about that, because it was I'll call it a conventional HVAC business that took that assignment on and ended up with 6 of their people being certified as a result of that. And Steve actually was on site that day. So it was a great opportunity for me to follow the process of how you actually move from a great idea, which many of the things that we want to do in sustainable energy are, to the real world of how does that actually get implemented. Because like Brad, I'm a small business person. So, I got to see, how that fits in my business plans. And, fortunately it did, but I would also say that at that time I was doing all those things, it was a pretty lonely environment from the point of view of other businesses that were trying to do the same thing. And the absence, I think, of a lot of solid business analysis behind doing those sorts of things. I think we've come a long way, but I think there's still a lot more we could do to grease the skids, if we want to call it that, for greater adoption of some of these technologies, especially in the small business community. And I could talk for an hour about why I think that's important, but I won't. So those are some of the things that, some of the ways that that Switch experience influenced some of my business decisions and personal decisions. And I would also say that you can see that transition in the decision that I made a few years ago to change from my original business name, which was Natural Capital Resources, And I actually created that business 2 years before Paul Hawken and Amory and Hunter Lovins wrote Natural Capitalism. But that became my Bible. And I was sharing copies of that book with anybody I could think of, including the mayor of the city of Kingston on several occasions and the regional director of MTO at the time. And so I was trying to move those ideas forward through my business. But at the end of the day, what I decided was there were enough people who were working away on the technologies and building these systems that my best opportunity for moving the yardsticks on these things was to move over fully to, I would call it sort of business and the evaluation and the economics side of this, which led me to change the name of my business to Pivotal Momentum, which I think is probably self-explanatory. It's not Switch Momentum, but the pivot conveys something of the same idea. So it is still very much a part of everything that I do. But those are just a couple of the observations I would have from the influence that Switch and all of you have had on my business decisions.
And I would say another interesting thing, like Switch was a spot where you'd sit down and talk with people. And I remember from a meeting, I was invited to be on the board at the college and have a say on some of the courses that they're teaching the students there to come out of the school. And, what sort of real world things does the college need to be teaching to get these students ready for hire when they graduated, and that started at a Switch meeting with a bunch of us talking, and Rick at Quantum, myself, a few of us got together with Steve Lapp over there, and really, Switch sort of, it was just a place where those minds would meet, jam ideas, and then all of a sudden something comes out of it, and it's really affecting boots on the ground and what's happening in what will happen in the future. And I know, like St. Lawrence College, hats off to them. Their students are sought after all over the province. Graduating, almost everybody gets employed, and you'd see sort of all of that coming together in this melting pot that we have at Switch, right? So there's some great things that came out, that sort of stuff comes out of it all the time. And looking back to when we were on the board, here we are many years later, and you see all that sort of, like Catherine's saying, all that's getting implemented and hitting the ground.
Harriet, how has being a member of Switch influenced your lifestyle?
Well, I think
I'm not being too.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead.
As I've said before, and all of us have said, the quality of people at these meetings and the speakers, we learn so much. I mean, I'm kind of allergic to fossil fuels, so I became an environmentalist in training, so to speak. And a lot of this was black box, and through people like Brad and Dawn and Shannon and all these people, I had a natural interest, but it was sustained and grew incredibly as a result of the diversity of renewables and other conservation efforts that we were discussing on a monthly basis. And as a result of that, I was invited to join the NRC IRAP National Environment Team, which is based out of Vancouver. So looking at assessing environmental projects from coast to coast to coast. And actually, after I retired, I stayed, I got a post-retirement contract just for of environmental assessments of projects the government was looking at for a couple of years. So, and I'm a vegetarian because I learned a lot about what all that is as well. So it's impacted my life greatly, and I've implemented, as Kathy did, so many of the technologies that when you first hear about them is like a black box and you're afraid of it and you think it's going to cost them the world. The reality is it saves you tons of money. And one of my big bugaboos is always, people are talking about the planet and climate change, which is all true. But if we focused on saving people money, I think it would have more of an impact, because you save a ton when you use nature, to assist you rather than fighting nature. Thanks.
And
May
Harry
I
has
just add one additional point? I'd love to follow up on Harriet's point there about saving money, because the other element, and I think this is going to be really important for Switch, or could be if you choose to sort of embrace it, is that because of the experience that we have had over the last 2.5 years, the notion of resilience and being able to stay in operating, whether you're a business or not-for-profit or a university or whoever, that notion of resilience, I think sustainable energy has a lot to contribute to that. And I know that was part of the reason that I undertook to install some of my own systems here, because they were not dependent on the grid. And so I could stay operating and keep the pipes from freezing, so to speak, if I wish to do so, using sustainable energy to some extent. So I've done quite a lot on that front, and I think there would be a great appetite for that. So in addition to, I don't know the degree to which any of this stuff saved me money. I know I calculated the payback on my solar panels, and it was 42 years, but that wasn't the reason I did it anyway. But the notion of resilience and being able to bounce back from economic shocks, natural disasters, or whatever else, I think is something that Switch would be well advised to pay attention to in the years to come. I think there's big opportunity for you there, especially if you pursue it based on distributed systems.
I think, and also to Harriet's point, when you hit people in the pocketbook, it matters. Okay. So, if I start talking about the influence of biomass heating in just our area, all I have to do is turn to 1998 when we had an ice storm, 2000 Y2K, when people thought the world was going to end. After 9/11, in the World Trade Center, 2005 when we had Rita and Katrina hit the hurricanes down in New Orleans, 2008, what was happening with the housing boom and bust. During all those times, the cost of energy was rising, and people turned to biomass. If we want to talk specifically, and this year, we are seeing it in our industry. This is going to be another boom year for people heating their homes with biomass. It's the price of gas at $2 a liter. Once again, people are looking for the renewable fuels to heat their home. And to Catherine's point, if we could get some government subsidies to help more with solar, when Catherine got it was well before microfit and all that sort of stuff. And but microfit proved, and the FIT program proved, that if you give people money, they will change what they do. I mean, it's that simple. People on this call are all like-minded. We'll probably do it for all those reasons, and we all do. But if you put money in people's pocketbook, then you're really going to have some influence and some change. And we saw that. At the time when the FIT program was introduced, there was 3 of us doing solar in the region. And during microfit, we hit there's 27 different companies doing it. So that just shows that, putting money in people's pockets can make that difference for sure.
Brad, it was bioenergy that got me through the 1998 ice storm.
As it did most of us.
Brad and Harriet, I just wanted to ask briefly if you could reflect on your experience of being a board member of Switch. Like, what were the challenges and like the best parts of being?
Who do you want to go first?
You can go first. Tara.
Okay. Well, as I said, I learned not only from Switch meetings, but from my fellow board members. And we were very lucky to have a lawyer on our board, Perlisa. You know, there was all of it. You know, we had resources like Catherine for marketing. It just, we had the college, we had someone from Utilities Kingston. We've always had someone from either the City of Kingston or Economic Development. So the learning for me never stopped, whether it was a Switch meeting or it was a board meeting. And it was a very, I guess I was on the board 13 years. I have a mug that says that. But David kindly got me a mug that says I've been a board member. I have been a board member. And like I said, the diversity and the connections, not only in the meetings, but actually through the board. I'm sure we did a lot of very interesting things that at my advanced stage I'm forgetting, but you know, there were synergies not only at the meetings, but also at the board. So.
And strong, good people. You know, when Don was the chair, you know, he was a good leader, right? You know, we had some good people, and not to say it was always easy. There was times when we were running out of money, you know, and people reached into their pockets and made things happen. You know, I remember there was a couple of times we didn't know if we were going to survive, right? In the early days. And got through it. And so it was those strong people that really helped forge us through. Because these are early days. These are days when people didn't know what a solar panel was. I remember bringing in a solar panel and showing people, and they're going, "Oh, that's what it is." You know, you got to remember it's a different world. Here we are 20 years later, right? Like it's really, really different. People didn't understand how any of that technology works. I remember getting up and talking about wood stoves, and it's probably some people on the call here today, you know, how wood stoves are one of the most sustainable ways we can heat our homes in our region, right? Like that to people just like, oh yeah, so our grandparents knew this technology. So there's just some good stuff that comes out of it. Good people on the board, and you know, my best experience is just being on the board with all those good people, having all those great, smart people on the board with me.
Thank you so much for your answers. I mean, you've touched upon a lot of the things that you were involved with, and that obviously was very much like related to some of the historical moments in the organization as well. And so much of it seems like, you know, it's influenced the community and your personal lives and making decisions, and you know, like a lot of things have kind of impacted all of you, but also the community. But I wanted to follow up with the microgrid program, and then also the biomass. I'm just like so not familiar with what it is, and it seems like it was such a big impact in the community and such a big accomplishment as well of the organization. So like Brad has spoken about it a little bit, but if other Catherine or Harriet, you would like to touch upon that part of the project, or other like big accomplishments of the organization, that would be great.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, I was just going to make a couple of comments on the microfit program, because I had the opportunity back when that was being introduced to sit in on some of the sort of OPA conference calls whenever they were trying to process all the applications for that. And I can tell you that they had no idea that that program was going to elicit the reaction that it did. There were hundreds and hundreds of applications on their plate, so to speak. And they didn't really staff up to process that. I don't think I'm revealing any secrets, but I believe that they thought that there would be a few big applications and that individual homeowners or community groups doing community energy projects would be few and far between. That we might be able to drive through the streets of Kingston and see a few solar panels on a few houses. And if that was what resulted, then they would have been happy with that. So I think that Switch can sort of take some credit for being one of the communities. There's probably, I'm sure there were others too, that really went to work to make sure that that opportunity to participate in microfit was available to the largest number of people. And if you drive around the countryside, even just in this sort of Kingston area, there are all kinds of sheds and barns that have solar panels, like significant sized installations there. And my understanding is all of that was triggered by microfit. So I think there's some credit to be taken on Switch's behalf there for really getting behind that. I think there is also, though, we need to be mindful that sometimes some of these bigger organizations, like the various, whether it's Hydro One or any of the other sort of spin-offs, so to speak, from the old days of Ontario Hydro, they're not necessarily on the same page on these things as we might be. So I think that's something that we need to think about going forward, that we're going to have to figure out ways to succeed in spite of what might seem sometimes to be a preoccupation with a relatively small number of very large organizations that they would think to deal with, as opposed to the kinds of folks that are represented on this call today.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something, a metric before, Catherine. I thought our microfit, because we were phase one, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without Brad and his company. But I mean, they were just fabulous. They just took us through the whole process and sign here. But Fit One pays 80.2 cents per kilowatt hour, when we pay in today's world with all the charges about 20 cents. So I think we calculated a return of 11 to 13%. And actually, I had to retire at 66 because, my depreciation was gone from the system, and it would have boosted me to the next tax bracket. But the really cool thing is that, over the past 20 years, we're now, as you say, moving to the next phase where we have these panels. They're coming to the end of their 20-year contract, but I have an electric vehicle. We now have an electric hot water heater, heat pump, and in fact, through perhaps a Tesla solar wall or whatever, we will be able to harvest and use the, I think, I'm trying to think of, I should have had that number at my fingertips. But basically, we'll go to net pay, which means we pay nothing for electricity over the year, because we generate about as much as we use. And then you move forward with more savings. So all these things have made a huge impact. And as far as the electrification, as has been noted before, and I was really interested to hear Paul when he spoke about the electric buses, because you find when you go to electric stuff, vehicles, buses, the maintenance cost is almost nothing. And it's not the case for Paul, of course, a big bus, but as he said in his presentation, it was a lot less than we thought it was going to be. So there's a lot of, politics and misinformation and misdirection about what all this stuff really costs. And thanks to people like Brad and Lisa and many people on the board, we got the straight goods and we benefited from it. So.
And your wood stove too.
Yes, we bought a wood stove from Brad.
Yeah, and I'll say too, Switch helped. So just at the store here, we had a visit from the OPA in early days, because we had solar and wind technology here in the building, we still do. And, you know, Switch sort of helped organize them come and as Catherine said, a lot of frustrations with launching that program. They didn't know what they're getting into, and they didn't even know what a solar panel looked like. I mean, it was strange when you think about that. And Switch was good at bringing those people to town here and showing them the technology and how it worked, and that really helped, you know, the entire province sort of move forward with that program. I also remember Ted giving me a call, and he brought down some folks from Natural Resources Canada, because, you know, I keep talking about wood stoves, and they didn't know how a modern wood stove works and how clean and energy efficient they are, and how, you know, you can sustain an entire home with you know, 4 acres of wood will sustain a home forever. And they just didn't know these concepts. You know, they just thought wood stoves were something you had at a cottage and you threw some wood in it and smoke came out of your chimney and it was not great. And to show them, you know, how a clean burning wood stove can, you know, be one of the most efficient things in your home. So Switch sort of helped bring those people in to see the hands-on applications. You know, there was rumors going around at the provincial level about the future of wood stoves in the province. We got 5 million people burning wood stoves in the province of Ontario, and they were talking about eliminating them at one point. And Switch sort of helped turn that tide, you know, by sitting here talking to them, showing them. I'm not going to say it was all that, but it was a piece of the puzzle. They played an important piece there as well. So that's another great thing that came out of the whole thing.
Thank you for your detailed answer. I think I am learning so much about this program and like what specifics went down there and stuff. And I'm sure that all of these ideas and everything, they brew well, like during like some of those conferences that are also a big part of the organization. So yeah, like Catherine, maybe, no, sorry, Harriet, maybe, since you may have been involved in organizing these conferences, can you speak a little bit about that? And then maybe have follow-up from Catherine and Brad.
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit of history now, but we had up to 2 a year, and it generated some funds for Switch to continue our efforts. And it was, as Brad says, you know, similar, it was just a larger Switch meeting, if you will, where we had our local entrepreneurs taking booths at these places. And, you know, we would draw people in from Ottawa to Toronto corridor. I think we might have had a few people elsewhere, but it was in essence a larger and longer term Switch meeting where in fact we could promote our local technology to other to our members, our guests. The students always had a big role in it, and we made some money along the side. So I was able through you know, I worked with Ted at the time. He was executive director to in fact get some IRAP funding for this particular conference, because as Brad as all 3 of us have said, there was not only a direct but an indirect economic development benefit for our community and for the surrounding areas. So there was real value to supporting the conference and supporting the people that were going to be there. So it was always a successful event. And yeah, it's hard. We can't be a charity because as Kathy and Brad have said, you know, a big component of our history has always been our local entrepreneurs and, you know, and all corporations and municipalities that participate in Switch, including, you know, residences like John is involved with. So we cover all bases in our and other communities. And that as a result, we can't be a charity, but we are a not-for-profit. So does that handle it?
You're being modest here. You did a great job on those conferences. It was, you really did a lot of the heavy lifting on those, and they were really very successful. Yeah, the Green Profit Conference, they were great. They really brought a lot of people in, and it was a friendly, a great spot for people to talk and not feel like they're pressured, or it's just sort of a good free flow of ideas and stuff at those conferences. It was really good. They were really great.
Yeah, I think one of the reason I don't remember more is because I was so exhausted, and the process was so onerous that my memory has chosen to delete a lot of it.
They were great. You did a great job.
I would only add, and you probably don't want to hear this, Harriet, because of the exhaustion, but I understand why you were describing the conferences in more of the historical sense, but I think there's a big opportunity in front of Switch right now to sort of, I'll just describe it this way, reinterpret or help all of us, not just people who are Switch members, but everyone, sort of reinterpret the place of sustainable energy in this new normal we're in, because there's been enormous upheaval in the last couple of years, and not all of it is directly related to the pandemic. And so I could imagine that Switch could organize a conference that really dives deep into some of the fundamental changes that have taken place and how we all need to move forward in that brave new world. So I encourage Switch to think about that. And if you need a list of topics, I can give you some.
And I guess I could help somewhat.
Yes, I wasn't suggesting that you'd have to do all of it, Harriet.
Thank you for touching up on
Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing up the question of initiatives that you would like to see happen in the future. So now we should move to the section about the future of Switch. And could you please share your thoughts and ideas about where you see Switch going in, let's say first in the next 5 to 10 years? Maybe Catherine, you could start.
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of kick that off. There were a couple that I jotted down to raise with you today, just thinking about the changes that had taken place in I'll call it the context of sustainable energy over the last few years, particularly, but some of them have been growing for a decade or more. And I go back, for instance, to Brad's point about the role of bioenergy in getting us through things like the ice storm and so on. So the first one that I would observe is that I think Switch has a big opportunity to position sustainable energy. If you do this right, you can position sustainable energy not just as good for the environment. I don't think we need to talk about that, but just as a source of resilience in a world that has become very sort of concentrated in terms of centralized systems, and the weakness of those centralized systems when you get hammered by something, whether it's an ice storm or power outage or major grid failure or something else, is that we could in this area, this region, really provide some leadership on that front of what would a distributed energy system look like that would be cost effective, of course, deliver environmental benefits, but also build in some resilience for our citizens, our businesses, and other organizations. So that vulnerability to centralized systems worries me quite a lot these days. And it worries me whether we're talking about electricity supplied from nuclear power plant or anywhere, or fossil fuels, or any of the other big organizations. if those supply chains, which is the other piece I want to talk about next, is if those supply chains break down because, you know, the grid goes out, that's a serious problem economically, socially, environmentally, everything else. Because what happens is people tend to use systems that are not necessarily preferable from many of those points of view. So that's one of the first topics and opportunities I think is in front of Switch if you decide to engage with it. Secondly is just the massive upheaval in supply chains. And it worries me personally that well over half of the solar panels that are manufactured in the world come from China. And we can debate the politics of that, but having that degree of dependence on one national supplier is something that I think we should be scratching our heads about and saying, you know, why don't we have solar panel manufacturers here in North America? And certainly in this area, it would be something that would be terrific. And it's especially useful for a Switch to think about that because we're now starting to see technologies and systems coming forward that can recycle solar panels. And so those technologies are now moving to the fore. Why couldn't Switch play a role in trying to set up a facility that would recycle those solar panels? There's going to be, because of the kind of experience that the Harriets of the world have had, there are a lot of solar panels that are reaching the end of their life. Well, what's going to happen to them if we don't have a solution to that? So it just struck me that that was another, just looking at the supply chain issues associated with sustainable energy. Even The Economist magazine's been writing about this, so I'm not the first person to talk about it. And then the third question, which is a really messy question, is just embracing the messiness of transitions from, you know, one or more energy sources to another. That's a big question in front of us right now. And then the fourth one is that, which we've touched upon already, is that the environmental case for sustainable energy needs to be married with the business case for it, which we've already talked about. But I think Switch has the people in its midst that could be really effective in that. And I would suggest to you that I just gave you lists of topics for a conference if you ever wanted to organize one. So I think I'll leave it at that and invite comment, feedback, or contributions from Brad and Harriet.
You talked about, you know, initiatives in the future of Switch. And I guess one question I always go in the back of my brain is, what is green energy today? You know, in the early 2000s, we knew what green energy was. I think if you went out and talked to people on the street, they sort of knew what it was, and they sort of maybe sought after green energy, or had, you know, I think most people did. And I just don't know if that's true today in this post-COVID world. I mean, worrying about the pandemic, you know, Catherine mentioned supply chain. I can tell you supply chain has been a problem. You know, you don't realize how much stuff is made in China until this happens, and one little thing like this big, and you can't get an entire barbecue or fireplace or something. You know, so I think people have been really concerned about the COVID, economics, those sort of things, and maybe Switch could play a role in helping the average folk sort of know, what does green energy mean? What does it mean in your life? You know, I think that's a really, because I don't hear it anymore. I mean, has it become normal? I think somewhat, but I don't think it has. I think it's been put on the back burner, and we need to get it back on the front burner again.
Okay, I think the key word is what Catherine introduced originally, which is resilience. And I think the morphing of Switch, in my personal opinion, along the lines of what Brad was just talking about, in fact, that, you know, I was reviewing it last night and thinking, you know, we have these sectors that are all kind of renewable energy, biomass, blah, blah, blah. And I'm wondering if we should morph to something more generic, like, you know, air, land, water. I mean, hydrogen, as Carol has been educating us on, is really important. You know, the other areas are all important. Biomass, hydrogen, renewables, which includes a bunch of things. So I think that there's some morphing required, because we were so focused, and our economic development was all about, you know, to a large extent, electrification, which is still going on. But I think as people have mentioned, that a conference with respect to not only where we're going, but in fact, success stories and education of those that have never seen what we all know and enjoy. And the final thing is, and this is more a municipal, provincial area, of course. Provincially, we don't have much choice there, but the reality is that we as professionals are able to afford a lot of sustainable solutions. And the issue is, how do we broaden the reach to those who could benefit greatly, more greatly even than us, and saving some money and perhaps some time and becoming more resilient. And that's done in a lot of places. And I don't know if we have that in Kingston yet, Paul, but through municipal bonds and through other agencies. So I think spreading the word and giving more equal opportunity to our local society in large, I think is an important goal if it doesn't cost too much money. So.
Wonderful. I think you've opened up so many interesting points for discussion now. Yes, Catherine?
Yeah, I'd love to just follow on. I don't know. I think I've done this about 4 times in this conversation here, but I just wanted to follow on the point that you were making about, especially whenever you said, you know, if it doesn't cost too much money, and just commend to you the McKinsey report from October of 2021. So it's not that old. Called Innovating to Net Zero, an Executive's Guide to Climate Technology. And they compared 5 different kinds of technologies: electrification, improvements in technologies applied to agriculture, to power grid, and they included hydrogen and carbon capture. And then they calculated the effective investment per gigaton and for each of those types of technology investments. And I have to tell you, electrification was from 140 to $200 billion per gigaton. Carbon capture was 3.3 to 16.3. Hydrogen was 40 to 60. This is all based on per gigaton achievements or abatements and this was all based on the year 2050. So we could, you know, quibble about all those things, but there has been some work done on those things, and you kind of have to ask yourself the question, why are we all so fixated on electrification if some of these other options, even improvements to the power grid, was 25% of the electrification number? I didn't calculate any of this, but I was kind of stunned whenever I looked at this and thought, you know, why aren't we taking a look at this to see where we might be able to achieve some significant gains without having to invest billions and billions of dollars? Because quite honestly, right now, I'm not sure that those billions of dollars are there for it. So we might have to change our thinking a little bit on that. The other point I just wanted to mention, which I intended to mention before, is that a good number of years ago, Warren Mabee proposed at a Switch meeting, the planning meeting that I was attended, that we set as our target for when it comes to sustainable energy to make, at that point in time, he referred to Eastern Ontario, not Southeastern Ontario, but I think it's probably overlaps a fair degree. He suggested that we make Eastern Ontario energy self-sufficient, which is quite a goal to set. And he didn't mean that we would just produce sustainable energy, but that we would produce enough sustainable energy to offset, because we might sell it to somebody else, to offset the non-sustainable energy that we would have to import from somewhere else. Because there are some, I think he was being realistic enough to understand that it's going to take a while to make a transition entirely away from fossil fuels. And I mean, just diesel and moving goods is a good example of where we've really made very little progress. But I would encourage Switch to think in terms of a big goal like that. And it doesn't have to be that one, but rather than kind of incrementalizing our way along, say, well, what if we took on sort of a big project like that and said, we're going to make this region or whatever geographic designation you want to use, self-sufficient when it comes to sustainable energy. I mean, and then that opens up all kinds of opportunities, whether it's bioenergy or wind or solar or 100 other things, geothermal, and go after those sorts of things. So I just want to issue that challenge to Switch to think a little bit bigger here. You've had a good first 20 years. What's next?
In a country like Canada, I think that makes complete sense. You think of the miles and miles of hydro lines, for example, in this country, trying to get power to areas that are so far removed. I think if we started thinking in a totally different model of just what you're saying, localized sustainable energy units, we would have remarkable success. And I actually proposed to Switch, and I heard you mention, two of you mention hydrogen finally. I remember listening to Diane Swayze about 6 years ago. Hydrogen wasn't even in any of the things that she had produced, or did she ever mention it? But anyway, I've proposed that somebody look at the windmills on Wolf Island, look at electrolyzers that are definitely available. The Stewart family apparently are shipping them all over the world. Talk to Britt Smith and Durnekamp, Nate, and the city, see if you can't work together on a pilot project using the water that is sitting in front of us and producing, and the hydrogen fuel cells to somehow power those two big new units that are going up, developments, the one at Elevator Bay and the one downtown by Brett, and see whether you can't come up with some sort of model powering the electrolyzers with the wind power. And it seems to me that might be doable. And if you could, and it might be economically viable, but I do not have the background, because I know, well, I'll give a little bit of background. I do know that the Dutch are madly working using hydrogen, but they're using, I think, liquefied natural gas as their source. But also in the States, they're heating apartment buildings with fuel cells. And then I know that Apple had a huge development. Harriet, the original power was solar panels. They then had 6 hydrogen fuel cells. It was powering iCloud storage, and it's now closed, but I'm not sure whether it's closed because they're full. Rather than it wasn't working, but they then sold all their extra power to the little town they were right beside. Anyway, I know the technology exists. It could be improved on, I'm sure, to make it totally relevant to our little area. And then, as I pointed out to somebody, if you take Kingston as a hub, go up the lake 100 kilometers, down the lake 100 kilometers, north to Ottawa 200 kilometers, you've got an area about the size of the Netherlands. And if you want some beautiful papers on their hydrogen policy, Rotterdam is a designated hydrogen port now. They're putting their electrolyzers there. but you've got an area about the size of the Netherlands, so you've already got some facts and figures you can use. And that's all I'm going to say, but I definitely think that there is a potential for hydrogen. And if you think small, I am a big thinker of small, and we've got to change. We're still thinking in terms of a fossil fuel model. You can't see me, but I'm using my arms, waving them all over the place. We're still thinking in terms of fossil fuels. Think small, think hub, think producing hydrogen on Wolf Island, bringing it across on the ferry in canisters, not worrying about lines or transporting liquid hydrogen. I'm sure you can make a strong enough canister, or if necessary, work with the fireboat people and have them develop you a really strong fireboat. The Dutch have already got a couple of freighters that they've refitted. Anyway, and they're working with Iceland, incidentally, which I think is quite fascinating.
Thank you, Carol. I think we need to,
Okay.
as host, I need to jump in for just a second on some operational stuff. Darko has booked this meeting until 10. Our normal switch meetings only go till 9:30. So I need to check with Jung-Ah and Boyana about how much more you want to cover, whether our interviewees have bandwidth to stay around for another half hour. And certainly during that time, for those who can stay, we'd be happy to open it up and sort of get people's thoughts on their experiences with Switch. I mean, we're still trying to keep it sort of historical to some extent. The stuff that's been raised has been absolutely awesome, but we're trying to sort of capture the feel of the last 20 years. So if that could be part of what you want to raise. Anyway, first question is back to Boyana and Jung-Ah. What more do you want to get to?
I think maybe, I don't know if Brianna can speak to this as well, but maybe if we can open it up to the whole group now, and then see what everybody else has to speak about, things that has been raised, or if they want to ask questions to the panels or to each other or something. It would be nice to get to know that from my end.
Can the panelists stick around a little longer?
Yeah, I'm okay.
I've got 15 minutes or so. Yep.
Okay. All right. So I'm seeing a question here. Tony has a question. What type of hydrogen is Carol speaking about? Green, blue, or is there any other? So Carol, I know you're an expert.
I'm not an expert, and I'm sorry, I sound sort of garbled, but I will say that I'm talking purely green hydrogen that you get from the electrolysis of water. And I do know that there are strong arguments against this, mainly the cost, the amount of energy needed to produce the hydrogen, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it is something to consider. And you could, if you wanted to, consider other sources of hydrogen. But my big point is, think local, think small as a pilot project. And I'm thinking if you could develop a viable model to heat these big new developments, power these big new developments, sell whatever excess power there is to the city, you could export that technology. If you read the latest International Energy report, Africa is in dire straits, but it means that any country which had access to wind power, and remember, we're talking Africa, so we're thinking coast in my mind now, but access to water, they would be able to produce hydrogen and use hydrogen fuel cells. I think hydrogen is the fuel of the future, but we've got to get the costs down. And I think there's so many sources of hydrogen. I'd like to see us using garbage. I mean, but I know we've got to worry about all the carbon. Anyway, whatever. That's
Thank
all
you.
I have to say. So I'm
Well,
thinking
Carol.
clean hydrogen totally. Yes, Harriet.
I think, you know, one point you've raised, and it's, I haven't read the McKinsey study, Catherine, but
Mhm.
I, like Carol, I'm a big digester of the IEA because it talks about where we are today, where we've been, and in fact, there are some projections, and I think they're pretty good. As to Carol's point, I think just like in nature, you don't have one type of plant on an acreage. I think
No.
diversity and suitability, like maybe, yes, it's good here if we use electrolyzers because we have water, but I think we need to continue to involve all areas of renewable energy and systems where they fit best in whatever their local environment is. So I don't think there is one. I think there's a combo for each particular home, community, country, depending on the natural features that we have around us.
I agree, Harriet. Thank you. And thank you for listening to me.
Anyone else want to jump in on the hydrogen front, or do you see other technologies moving forward? Sorry, Jung-Ah, Boyana, I'm jumping in, but.
No problem.
I would just say that hydrogen has some thermodynamic inefficiency challenges. So for something like the elevator bay projects, why not use heat pumps? We pump the electricity across an underground cable to the mainland, and essentially doing that would be, at the end of the day, far more efficient than hydrogen. Hydrogen, I think, has a wonderful role, but for limited uses like industrial processes that are hard to decarbonize.
Good idea, but it's not a technology that's unique and that we would export. But it probably makes far more sense, Mark.
David, I have a comment.
Sure.
So just a thought for the mix to provoke other thoughts. When I think about this, I always think about it a couple of ways. First of all, it has to economically make sense, and seldom does it economically make sense to generate everything you need like on one site. Unfortunately, I wish it did. We've all ventured into this in our own personal and business lives where we have found some efficiencies from the things that Harriet and Brad and others are talking about. And I have a lot of those things in my own life too. But the problem is it's really hard to beat these centralized systems, right? Overall, when it comes to cost of delivering power and delivering gas and stuff. So when we think on like a national or regional level of how to transform our entire economy, I try to think about it in terms of how do we clean up the infrastructure that we have. And the conversation happening right now made me think about it. And I do talk to Hank and Nate and people like that. You know, how do we as business people credibly go to them and suggest these technologies if they're going to cost more? And then I look at things in the news, like our prime minister in Germany meeting the other day, and I've been involved in a lot of national level discussions about a big hydrogen export off the East Coast, which probably makes sense. I think we need to play on the resources that we have and implement these things, not just individually in our own homes and businesses as they make sense, but also on a system level, because Ontario's gone a long ways and we can go further in terms of cleaning our grid, because if we actually did have a clean grid, ideally with less nuclear, but clean, non-emitting grid, you can just unlock so much efficiencies. Like the wires are already there, and then you can run everything else, whether it's your existing stock, your new stock, your transportation sector. So I think about that, like how, if we're going to electrify everything, how far can we go? And then there's things that don't lend themselves as well to electrification, like heating and cooling, and that's where we need other renewable sources.
Mhm. All those wood stoves.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Darko is here. I would just like to elaborate on the future strategic directions of Switch. And one area where I think we can say that just we did not have much past track record on that, but we surely could have a great future record is closer ties with indigenous communities, especially because various issues of sustainable energy in remote areas and sustainability, we would both have very strong allies and could make a significant difference.
Thank you. Tatiana, I
Yes.
see you've had your hand up.
I did. I also wanted to add to that, coming in perhaps in perspective into at the 10-year mark and fit as a female entrepreneur to Switch. Some of these women through the different platforms and from provincial to municipal have been so inspiring. Like Harriet, like Shannon Claggett, like some of the boards, and Lisa as well. I'd like to see more of that in Switch. You aren't a social science group, you're a technical group, and supporting other technical women in this field forward in the next 20 years, like you've done in this last 10. Thank you. You're very inspiring.
Yeah. That's a really important point and something that could be captured in this history capsule project that's happening. And I'll just tell you anecdotally, I started the first 7 or 8 years of my career in other energy, like upstream oil, gas pipelines and power, meaning coal and gas. And when you would go to meetings and conferences, the ratio was approximately 1,000 to 2 men to women. And approximately 1,000 to 0 white men to visible minorities. It's still that way in those all of those energy sectors. Like you go to an oil sands conference today, upstream oil, gas, pipelines, power, any of this, coal, natural gas. That is who built, run, designed, and is still advocating for our utility systems of the past and present. When you go to a renewable energy company meeting, no matter how big, how small, conference or whatever, it's pretty much 50% women today and visible minorities everywhere, and the new graduates and people coming in the sector. By definition, the cleaning of our economy and being on the front lines of that is much more diverse and inclusive. There's Indigenous people in every meeting in every room I go to. And that alone is a reason for us to kind of just get on with it and stop treating energy like it was this undemocratic thing where only middle-aged white men could make money from it.
Woo!
We have our marching orders now. Thank you, Lisa.
As Liz Cheney said to an audience of young people, you know, the world has been ruled by old white men, and how has that worked out?
I will say that at any Globe and Mail conference I've been at, they offer free things, and I've been going to them, and they've been absolutely fascinating. But there's been a huge Indigenous representation at every one of them, and they are looking into all kinds of relatively green alternative solutions. They're very interested in that because, of course, a lot of it fits in with their philosophy. And I do know that I gave my collection on hydrogen to someone that I knew would then pass it on to the chiefs. The Indigenous population is definitely involved, and a lot of the speakers are young women generally.
I see Ed Thomas with his hand up.
Oh, hey,
gotten in before.
thank you. it's been lovely getting reacquainted. The word resilience comes up quite a bit. My own personal investing is got a pretty simple thesis, basically that the economy is about to be massively disrupted as renewable generation costs trend to zero. And I'm wondering if Switch perhaps has a future mission in preparing the regional economy to deal with that kind of disruption. So I'm just going to give a very tangible example and leave it. Let's suppose you're a small food processing plant. You know, you're probably using natural gas for most of your industrial heat. My thesis is you're about to get crushed by the industry, that the food processing competitor who electrifies their operations first, because they are going to acquire their input energy costs at something like 1/5 to maybe 1/3 of what your contingent costs are. Can Switch perhaps lead the local economy in anticipating and making the kind of moves required to keep pace, not get left behind?
Well, it's certainly open for discussion. I mean, you know, as the board chair, we've got that gets back to, you know, the boots on the ground and the organizing capacity, as with all of the amazing suggestions for where Switch could go. But I get it, you know, as I drive my Leaf to and from Napanee every day, you know, I'm laughing all the way to the bank compared to current gas prices. But, you know, it's that sort of mentality that needs to happen for a whole lot of people and a whole lot of sectors. So it's, but a very interesting concept. Yeah.
You could undercut every DoorDasher in town, David.
Yes, exactly.
May I add just one additional sort of historical point, which goes to what Ed was just saying, and I am a little skeptical about the cost going to zero, but as Ed has described, but I remember sitting in a Switch meeting. It was the same one we gathered together to help Steve Harrison bring his technology, his solar thermal technology, to market. And in the course of that discussion, several people at the meeting said, oh, sustainable energy, any form of sustainable energy, will be completely cost competitive with fossil fuels when fossil fuels are at if they're at $60 a barrel. And I remember, and like, we're world beaters. It's, you know, anything higher than that. So I'm thinking, why the heck hasn't that already happened? Because, you know, oil's well above $60 a barrel now. And I suspect that it comes from not having the infrastructure in place to make that transition smoothly, but which goes back to a little bit of what Lisa was talking about. I'm a little skeptical about the economies of scale associated with centralized systems too, because I'm one of many people dealing with, as you all are probably, well, not Harriet, still dealing with the stranded debt from Ontario Hydro from generations ago. So I'm not sure that that cost comparison is being made particularly fairly, but I would just like to encourage you to think about the point that I made a minute ago, which is you have to have the business case to go with the environmental case, which is really what Ed's saying, is if we can help organizations understand that, the rest should be relatively straightforward.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's low
and as
hanging
one of
fruit.
the, sorry, go ahead, Ed.
I'm sorry, Kathy. Yeah, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here to help people get their heads around the business case, right? The small plant operator, all these energy-intensive, medium-sized businesses, right? I think we're at that tipping point now where people can get ahead of the game and not get crushed.
I had a client, and I think I've talked about this before, in Trenton, that was making countertops, you know, for hotel lobbies and things like that. And they were using a ton of natural gas. They found and commissioned an incinerator in their plant for all these plastic, because it was plastic and wood scraps and all sorts of weird things. And basically they got something rated at that time, because it was more than a decade ago, to 2020 standards. So they were better than what the current pollution standards were for the stove. And they saved all their garbage costs. I think they saved like $500,000 a year. And I mean, and that was 10, 15 years ago. So it's eminently doable, but people need to know the numbers and get some guidance.
Brad, any other thoughts on where we should be going? What energies do you think are going to be the winners?
Yeah, well,
Besides biomass.
sorry. Yeah, I was just going to comment on the idea that Brad put forward a couple of minutes ago about the concept of what is green energy. I think that has to be expanded widely, and then everything else will follow along, because as I see on social media and all that stuff, there's a lot of deniers out there. And I think they got stronger with the movements of the convoy and stuff. And so they are equating mandates to fight against climate change. So then it's hard. And I see them every day on LinkedIn and Facebook and everywhere, trying to say that it's a hoax and whatnot. So I think campaigning on pro green energy, that this is happening, I think it's paramount in this case, for sure.
True enough. Rosie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was really interested recently. I've mentioned a couple of times that I've been working on a project that we're trying to write a really helpful report at a national level about green buildings, or buildings that are low carbon emitters. And eventually that we came to a point in that process where what we heard was what people really need is to see real examples in their neighborhood. It's not enough to see an example from Greece or Italy. Those are different climates, different jurisdictions. What clients can be convinced by when we try to design a building for them, for example, is to see another building in a similar sector that's near to them. So that's something that I do think we've heard from some of our Switch members, that they do that. And that they provide peer-to-peer tours, basically, of installations. And I'm seeing the need for that even more now. It's fantastic to have demonstration projects. Let's actually show them off to people and help our members show off their demonstration projects. I guess I'd also wanted to touch on interesting comments about the demographics of renewable energy. And I think there's something for women in renewable energy that's about, in some cases for some women, and I'm fortunate, being able to have their own solar panels on their roof producing electricity instead of this huge national and transnational system. It's exciting to have our own projects that we can see happen. And it is exciting to be able, if we are willing to make the financial commitment to be relatively early adopters in things like electric cars. It's a way to use our economic power, and it's gratifying. Thanks.
I'm going to jump in. I have some pressing issues with my daytime job. I need to run. So for those that were on the panel that there are left, thank you ever so much. I look forward to reconnecting with everybody on September 9th, I believe, is our next open meeting. Rest assured that the Heritage Subcommittee will be actively working over the rest of the summer months. We're going to do a whole series of in-person interviews, and this was sort of a kickoff. Anyway, Jungan Bojana, thank you very much for leading the discussion. Brad, Harriet, thank you for participating. Tom did send his regrets. I did hear back from him. He couldn't figure out, the connection wasn't working for him. So what was going on there, I don't know. And I will certainly offline say thank you to Catherine again on behalf of everybody. Anyway, thank you very much. Please don't let me disrupt the party, but I need to get back to the paying job. Thank you all ever so much.
Thanks, David.
Wait,
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Well, I also suggest that we kind of wrap this up. It was a fantastic session. We'll have edited version, and also the full recording will be available online. So there were a few people who had to leave earlier, but they won't be missing the rest. Thanks
Thanks,
to all.
Jeffo.
And at this, I'm stopping the recording now.